All right, guys, welcome to another episode of Stay Fearless, the Fearless Sports Performance Podcast. Today we are joined by Stephen Bruce. Bruce played college baseball at the University of Oklahoma and Keiser University, where he completed his college career as a starting pitcher with a remarkable undefeated 25-0 record, and played professional baseball for the Texas Rangers organization. He is now the pitching coach at Loyola University New Orleans, one of the top NAIA baseball programs in the country, with which he played an integral role in a historic program turnaround when he arrived in 2020. Bruce is an exceptional coach and person. He brings a strong insight to pitching development and competitive spirit. Bruce, I couldn't be more excited to have you on and share your insights and experiences with our listeners.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to get to talk to you again too. It's been too long, to be honest.
For sure, man. It has. So this will be a good one, man. I'm excited to catch up and kind of get after it.
Yeah. Have some more talks like we used to on the diamond.
Oh yeah. This will be good, man. So I'm kind of interested to hear, kind of opening up with this, but I'm interested to hear about your experiences in D1 versus NAIA versus pro ball, and how you kind of navigated at each level and some of the things that you learned along that path.
Yeah. So I think everyone's path is a little different depending on where you play. So from my experience at the University of Oklahoma, we were really good. So, coming out of high school, I was a top recruit coming out of high school just in the state of Texas. But then you get on campus and you realize this is, I was a starting pitcher throughout my entire high school career. You get there and you're like, the chances of me starting is very slim, right? So I went to a university where they just came back from the College World Series and were returning like almost every single player. So there was a lot I had to learn quickly. And so I was a reliever for a little bit. I only threw about 15 innings or so my freshman year, but I learned a lot. Got to see postseason Division I baseball. We made it to the Super Regional, I think, that year. Or no, actually we went regional my freshman year. So got a little taste of that. I got to learn from a lot of good guys that got drafted. And then sophomore year was about the same thing. Went to a Super Regional, played with John Gray, Damian Magnifico, guys that, throwing 100 miles an hour, really good athletes just in general. And then, so going from that, the competition at Division I level, it was like the transition to NAIA was very, I guess the best way to put it is like Division I baseball is very transactional, right? So, and I think that was just my experience. I think that could be different for other people as well. It just depends on who you play for. But at a Division I level, where I was, you get out what you get out. Like the coach is going to get X, Y, and Z from you. And that's kind of it. There wasn't a whole lot of development at the time, and not like what it is today with the technology that we have, but what's going on with Twitter and X and guys being able to get recruited and TrackMan basically at every single facility. I went to a NAIA school where the focus was on development and really personal relationships and being a good teammate. And so I felt that when I got there, I was like, wow, this is completely different. Like I got the experience over here of what it's like to be transactional. And then I got an experience of what it's like to, do everything. Right. So we built our dugouts at our field, right? Like you took a lot of ownership in everything you did. At Oklahoma, we had guys doing everything for us. And when you go to NAIA school, you feel like you really own everything you do and everything you put into it. So I feel like I got a lot more out of the game of baseball. And I think when you get a lot more out of it, you get a lot back, right? Like when you put a lot into it and you build the field, you work with your teammates to try to figure out how to win. What do we have to win? What do I have to do to get better? Because we only have so many resources. I feel like the game rewards you when you really put a lot into it. And I think that's the opportunity I was given. I was given an opportunity at an AI school to just pour my heart out into the game. And I was, ended up being rewarded. So, and then ended up playing in pro ball for that reason. So there's a lot of things that had to do with that playing in pro ball. It wasn't just me. There was a lot of people that had moving parts in that. Our head coach, Jeremy Kennedy, had a huge part in that. Being able to put his name on me and, speak to my work ethic, my character, as an NAIA guy signed as a free agent, they can't just take anybody. That's got to be someone who they don't have to worry about. That's going to come in, work, and be a good teammate. So, and then Cliff Tarakusco, the scout that signed me, obviously put his name on me as well. So there's a lot of people that stuck their neck out for me, and so I was fortunate to do that. And then when you get into pro ball, obviously, that's a big jump, big jump. So I think a lot of it was the biggest difference. Like if I didn't have a routine in general for my pitching, everyday daily routine, what I did to get ready, what I did to post care, pre-care, I wouldn't have survived. But I kind of already had a good routine, and so I was able to just kind of rely on that quite a bit. But yeah, in terms of like the difference, D1, very transactional, played at a high level, good competition. NAIA, same thing. There's a lot of good competition, especially when you're playing at the top. A lot of them are D1 kickbacks. And so there I was able to develop close relationships and work one-on-one with coaches and get to know myself a little bit better and identify exactly what kind of pitcher I am. And that's kind of what prepared me for pro ball in general, was that culture that I was in at Keiser. So like that, if it wasn't for that culture, there's no way I would have even been prepared at all for pro ball. But and then you get into pro ball and it's just sink or swim, really. It's you got to be ready to go every single day. You play 144 games in the minor league, so it's a constant every single day, relying on the routine over and over and over. But yeah, that's the three biggest differences.
Yeah, for sure. You kind of mentioned something that I thought is important. You mentioned like the culture aspect of how that kind of prepared you for the adversity you're going to face in pro ball, having that culture at Keiser, and taking a lot of pride in the work you were doing, developing those deep relationships. So let's talk about that culture. And I got to kind of experience that at Loyola when you and Kay came in, and we were able to build that for ourselves. But I think that means so much, not just to the team and the success of the team, but also the success of the individual. Because when you have that culture, you have everybody around you pulling in the right direction, and you have that development first mindset. I feel like that makes such a big difference on performance and what you become.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the best, like, there's a lot of, the way Coach K kind of explains it is, you got to earn respect. That's number one. Maximize your individual potential. That's number two. Personal accountability, like being responsible and owning what you own, right? And then ultimately being reliable. Those four components are kind of the culture that was at Keiser and still is at Loyola today. Those are the things that we focus on. I think all of that kind of goes into growth. Like it's a growth mentality. That's it. And if you're constantly trying to grow in those four components every single day, whether you maximize everything you're capable of doing or not, like you're going to grow as a person. And I think that's really what I needed at that time. And that's really what helped me a ton. And when everyone else is doing that around you, it's so much easier, right? Like it's just easier because when you lose, it's not a big deal. You can rely on the culture. Like you go back to the routine, you go back to what we do. It's growth mentality. Tomorrow's a new day. So we rely on that heavily. And that's why losing there's a plan in place. Like when you lose, you can go back and figure it out. There's a growth mentality culture. There's, we're constantly trying to earn respect every day. So it's that kind of goes into everything. It's easy to lose and hop back on the train and go win again. Right. And that's the big thing, resiliency. And I think that's kind of what it produces, really. It produces guys that are resilient. And in pro ball, you have to have that. And that's what prepared me the most is in pro ball. I mean, that's like one of the biggest jumps. Like, at the MLB level, they ask, guy gets called up from AA and, maybe the coaches up there don't know him all that well. He ran up pretty quick. And the first thing they're going to ask is, do we have to worry about him? And like, that means when you get kicked in and you start getting hit around, how are you going to react? How are you going to respond? Because it's, you're pitching in front of 30, 40,000 people. And so that's important. You have to have that. This is an entertainment. When you're at the top, it's pure entertainment and they want to win. So you need to produce. And it's okay. We're going to lose. Baseball is so hard. So that culture prepared me a ton. And like we go back to the Division I culture, it was way different. It was very much very much pro style, I guess. You just kind of, this is what you get. There wasn't a whole lot of development, but aspect to it, like pro ball does, but that was just like, you throw 92, that's what we're going to get out of you.
Yeah.
Keiser, it was very much like, dude, how can we maximize every single day and every year to get you to do better than what you did the year before? But yeah, that the culture aspect is like, and so the three things that I kind of lean on, Coach K kind of instilled that culture into me, but the three things I lean on a lot, which is what I learned from Texas. Number one, be a good teammate. Like number one, that's overall. Number two is master the fundamentals. Like just be able to take care of the baseball. Like do the little things right to where you do them so often that you can't mess it up. And then number three is compete with passion. Like just compete, man, and show that you want to be there every day and you love the game, because there's a big difference in loving it and liking it, right? Like when you see a baseball guy who loves the game, I think we all know there's guys out there like that. I know you're one of them. You want to be around guys like that. They want guys like that in their organization. The guys that just love the game, can't get away from it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think like those three things are massive in being successful, because it is such a hard game and there's so much failure, and it's like, it really is a complex sport in the way that you can like go about development. There's so many things that go into it, and because it's hard and kind of time isn't on your side, especially for like a guy like me and a lot of guys that listen to this that are kind of undersized, don't have that natural ability, like that time is ticking. So it's, if you can have like a routine to fall back on in those fundamentals where, you know how to compete, you're mastering the fundamentals, you have that routine, and you have kind of that culture around you and those relationships, it makes it a lot easier to kind of slow yourself down, lock in, and then go out there and do what you got to do, and kind of stay, I guess, like focused, on what you're, getting after. Because it's a hard sport. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a game of failure, and there's so much competition out there, especially today with all the technology and development and everything going on.
Well, and it's easy to show up to the park every day when you love what you like. You love the guys you're around.
Totally.
Like it's a blast. That's like what we had when you were at Loyola. We didn't have the most talented guys in the world, but we maximized everyone's potential we possibly could, and everyone knew that was the plan. Everyone understood that, and sometimes it takes a couple guys to figure that out. But once they realize that's the goal, every time you show up every day, it's like, what are we going to do today, right? Who's going to be leading who's going to be leading the pack today? Like, who's going to do something crazy? And it's just it's so much fun showing up every day when the culture's like that.
Totally. So it makes it easier to work. And, I got to see kind of like, two different, cultures, and, getting to Loyola early on where not everybody was pulling in the right direction. I was able to work, but it makes it so much harder to get after it and like really stay focused, and do what you're doing. Those last couple of years, I felt like it was so easy to just lock in and do what you're doing because it was fun. We enjoyed, and everybody was pulling in the right direction. We're all having those conversations at the field of like, all right, like, what are you working on? All right, this is what I'm working on. This is what I'm feeling. Oh, I figured this out. Like, try this, try
Yeah.
that. And it totally changes everything around you, because now you're all kind of pulling in the right direction. Everybody's pushing for each other. Everybody's encouraging each other. And it just makes makes it way easier to develop and really, hone in on the craft, because, it's tough. It's tough. And at the end of the day, when you have that culture, it's easier to set yourself apart from, the rest of the competition,
Yeah.
because
And it's, as a pitching coach, it's easier for me to do my job when the culture's in place like that. Guys like yourself are going to learn from other teammates, and that's ultimately what I want. And I think that, when I got into pro ball, I learned so much from your teammates, right? Like, it depends on what organization you play for. But being someone like me, I'm not a prospect. Like, I'm not going to get a lot of time with coaches. I'm not, and I have to do things on my own, and I got to figure it out. So if you don't have a routine, like I said before, it's going to be very hard. And so I relied a lot on teammates that I threw with. Those relationships that I still have today, of guys that I barely even played with for, I only played with them for a few months, and we're still good friends. Because you go through stuff that, you share ideas, you throw together, you see some success together, you go through failure together, you watch each other go through failure. And it's a tough part in pro ball. One of the toughest things in pro ball is the culture of, you know, seeing a guy next to you get cut when you know he's a great player and he's one of your better friends, or seeing him go through some failure and you're having success. It's a tough one, right? So that's why it's always important to stay even keel and not ride the roller coaster. Like, just not, don't even attempt it, right? It's going to be opportunities for you to get it real high and, you know, celebrate. In college, you can kind of do that. There's a lot of that. But in pro ball, you don't want to be that guy because it's so hard. Guys are going up and down all the time, and you want to be there to support them, you know, especially when they're down. Like, any way you can help them out, or just keep their mind kind of like locked in. If you start to see them slipping a little bit, I think that's the coach in me a little bit. As a player, I kind of always knew I was going to be a coach just because of that, because I always cared about the guys around me, and like, if they weren't doing good, you know, I'm not trying to fix them. I'm just like, I talk to them like, you know, what's going on, like what's been working, what hasn't been, and just get them talking. And then next thing you know, we start game planning stuff, right? And we do that as players. And so if my pitching staff at Loyola, if our staff can do that, with each other, even in the college level, you know, the sky's the limit, you know. And now I'm be your best coach, right? Like, that's something I'll say quite a bit.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, it's kind of that saying, like, you know, with rising tides, all ships rise. And I think that's so big, and especially in baseball, because especially with pitching specifically, because it's so intricate. There's so many things and so many contributors, and it's easy to get lost in it. But when you have that culture with the guys around you, it makes it a lot easier to kind of find yourself, find where you're at, identify kind of where you are on the map, where you need to go, and how you're going to get there. And it's tough. I mean, you know, kind of talk about, you know, what it's like being a coach when you have so many guys under you. It's hard to kind of, you know, reach every single guy. There's only so many minutes in a practice, so many hours in a day. And so when you have that foundation of the culture, that kind of, you know, breeds that success on its own, and then you can, I feel like, fully give yourself to what's truly necessary. It allows you to do a lot more, for sure, and it allows the guys to do a lot more, because, you know, they're not relying on just you, or whoever else. They're able to kind of rely on each other, and everybody's, you know, learning. I think it creates that mindset of learning for each guy, where it's not just like, all right, like, I'm just going to do whatever the coach tells me, or I'm just kind of going through the motions. It creates that kind of ownership of your craft, where now everything is all right. I'm working towards something. I'm learning something, and then, you know, you start to figure things out, and everything starts to come together. And I feel like, especially with pitching, like, the more you learn, the more you realize there's more to learn.
Yeah.
And so, you know, it's a constant, like, working at your craft, and trying to figure things out.
You're really just trying to identify who you are, right? Like, you're the best version of yourself. And that's what I think a lot of kids out of high school don't quite understand yet, is
Mhm.
they don't really know who they are. And I think they change over time, and they don't understand that it's okay to change over time. You know, there's guys that go from throwing four seams all the time to they start throwing two seams, and then they become a sinker guy. And now they're throwing sliders when they grew up throwing curveballs and four seams, and now they understand, okay, maybe I'm like this, you know, I sink the ball, and maybe I don't throw as hard, and I can get outs that way. And that's where, like, the tech side of it is kind of a challenge, because, you know, that's very big right now. Guys want to just go get PRs and run the numbers up on TrackMan, but, you know, pitchability and identifying who you are as a person, as a pitcher, is the most important thing. And because now you have something to work off of. And from my perspective, like, how it happened for me, when I got into pro ball, I kind of knew I was, but I didn't. And this is like pure honesty. Like, I got in, and I'm throwing four seams, I'm missing up in the zone. And Jeff Andrews, our you know, one of our pitching coordinators at the time, who I think who's still with Texas right now, I think. He came up with a lot of experience, man. Love this guy. And he came up and he said, "Can you throw sinkers? You just throw sinkers?" And I said, "Yeah, I can do that." because I'm not going to ever say no to anything. I'm going to be like, I'm very open-minded. I'm like, I'll try anything. And I just want to get outs, right? So I start throwing sinkers over and over and over, no four seams. And I just did it over and over and over down in the zone. Just sink it, sink it, sink it. And I, said, hey, I'm going to start throwing them on both sides of the plate. And he said, well, when you get to that point, we can start doing that. Well, then that drives me. It's like, well, no, I'm going to do it. Like I want to, if someone says, you're not there yet, it's like, well, I want to test the waters.
Yeah.
That's just the nature of the athlete, right? I think we're all like that.
It's a challenge. Yeah.
So I started doing it right away. And I noticed I could do it. I could throw two seams front door to lefties and get it to leak back inside and freeze them up. And positioning myself on the rubber on a certain side would show the batter a ball out of my hand, right? So out of my hand, it would look like a ball and I'd be able to run it back. So for the longest time, I was pitching on the left side of the rubber where everything would look like a strike and out of my hand. That's just like, it's not like that for everyone, but typically if you throw on the left side, your sinker baller, you're going to start the ball in the zone, you're going to run it out. So I moved to the right side of the rubber and I started throwing sinkers and cutters out off the plate in, and I'm like going for contact. So I went from a very, let me see how many swings and misses I can get to, I'm just going to attack them as heavy as I can. And the minute I did that, the whole game changed. And a lot of that started with him telling me to throw sinkers. And then, months down the road, 1 year down the road, I find a four seam and it's 3 miles an hour harder than it was before. And I'm like, well, how did that happen? You know what I mean? And I think a lot of it was just extension with my two seam and sinker, right? So you learn from different ways. Like sometimes it takes time and it just takes someone to test you a little bit. And that's a big adversity that I had to deal with and I had to change quickly. And that's where like kind of Rapsodo helped me find my sinker a little bit because I was doing it, but I wasn't great. And then I got in Rapsodo and I threw one and I figured it out. And I just was like, the confidence went to the roof.
Mm-hmm.
Next, I was off. Like I never went back to Rapsodo. I looked at it every now and then on TrackMan, but for the most part, I didn't really need it because I kind of already did what I needed to do. And then I could move on and go back to pitching. But then that's when I became the sinker slider guy, just 24/7. So it was remarkable how it worked out that way.
Yeah. And it's interesting how you kind of describe like the way you utilize the tech, because I think the tech has a lot of value, but I think it can also be used improperly or overused at times. So obviously, you want to acknowledge it's there and you want to acknowledge that it's useful and helpful. But I think a lot of guys too will get too wrapped up in it and then they almost become like a robot, just like pitching to the numbers and they forget how to pitch. And I think that's massive, especially for young guys to understand. Yeah, I see it now with a lot of the high school guys that we train. They kind of will get a little bit too in love with wanting to use our TrackMan and see those numbers or just, because it's sexy, right? It's like the sexy tech, the new stuff. Everybody using it. Big league guys are using it. You're seeing it everywhere. But you don't want to just pitch to that and then say, for example, in actually a podcast that dropped this morning, the guy we had on was talking about, it's Tanner Pruitt was talking about, he had a guy that was throwing a changeup that it was like more of like a flat changeup that worked really well for his profile, but like taking the TrackMan numbers in isolation, it looks like a really bad changeup, but then you throw him on the mound, it's his best pitch. So it's like understanding the context of like, okay, how are you using that tech? That's like, okay, now I've gained that value from it. Now I'm ready to go back out there and learn how to compete with what I've gained. So like using it when it's time to use it and then being able to throw that away and almost create like two different. And for me as a player, I felt like I needed to create almost two different personas because I was such a thinker on the development side. I had to find a way to kind of separate that where it was like, all right, it was like me, the thinker, the guy working on trying to develop myself. And then once it was time to go out to compete, it was just like, all right, throw that all out the window and let's just whatever we got, let's roll with it and let's get after it.
Yeah, and that's where I feel like that's why we meshed really well from the beginning when I got there, because I think the strength of mine is pitchability, right? Like and I think a lot of people can attest to this. A lot of guys my age, I'm 32 now. Guys my age or even older, we came up without a lot of this. So we had to rely on pitching. We had to rely on pitchability. There was some development, but for the most part, we had to pitch. So once tech got involved, we already had the pitchability component instilled, right, and mastered at that point. So then I get into Rapsodo and TrackMan, and I realize, okay, I can use this for this. Great, thanks. It's just very much like, I'm stopping in, I'm grabbing, I'm fueling up, thanks, and I'm out, right?
Yeah.
I'm not going to sit there all day. I think there's some guys that can do that and they can still be effective. I do believe that. But it's that sustainable. So now it's like, it's very much like, how do we keep guys from getting so infused into it? Looking down at the numbers, going to pitch, looking down at the numbers. And it's tough because it is sexy, like you said. But that's where, like, when I came in, I think that's what I had a lot of. At Loyola, we don't have TrackMan, right? So that's something that we might get down the road. But at the same time, we didn't have it, so we utilized what we could, and that's where we got really good, because we had the pitchability as in the growth mindset of being able to pitch and identify who you were, right? You were a guy that could sink the ball, and I'll never forget that time. Like, we worked so hard with you on developing that sinker, right? And you would throw a four seam every once in a while, but we really got the sinker going, and we kept on with the plyo care. And after, like, I don't know, let's say 2 years, I think it was about 2 years, you went out in the regional, and this is the component, like, it's hard to teach, right? Like, you had pitchability already. Like, I could already feel it, like, when I came in. And then, so we worked on the plyo care. We did all that to gain some velo, which we did. So now we have that component. So you have a little bit of both. And now my job is just to keep you on track. Like, make sure you don't get lost. Like, if you feel like you're slipping and you're trying to throw more four seams, you think you can get up in the zone. My plan is to, my job is to keep you on track, make sure you're confident in who you are as a person, as a pitcher, and so you don't lose sight of who you are, right? And we continue to grow that way. It doesn't mean you have to stay that way, but I continue to help you on that track. And then you go in the regional, and Coach K looked at me and goes, "Who do you want?" And without a doubt, I said Acevedo. First and third, you got like the 2, 3, 4 hole, all Division I kickbacks. One guy was drafted already. The toughest part in their lineup, probably the best offense in the country. First and third, no outs, and this is a do or die game. And I went directly to you because I knew, one, you were going to throw strikes and you were going to pitch, and you were going to compete with passion. Like, you were going to compete. So you had all the components to pitch in a high level position. And that's what you have to pitch in that. So all these guys that are on tech all the time, they miss the fact that sometimes they'll miss, you got to be able to compete when it matters. Like, we can develop you all fall, but at the end of the day, when it comes to the postseason, I need to rely on guys that I know are going to compete, that don't really get stuck on that stuff. So it's great and it's sexy in the fall and whatnot, but you got to be able to separate it, because if not, you're going to pitch all year and then not go to the postseason because, you hit a couple PRs during the year, maybe threw hard, you got some outs, but I can't rely on numbers. I got to rely on TrackMan numbers, right? So, and then you ended up striking out 5 in a row, and you hit
something like that,
miles an hour or something like that.
I don't know, man.
You weren't even,
I don't know.
You weren't even close to that. And then we put you in that position and you didn't miss. I still have the video saved. You didn't miss a spot, and it was incredible. And like, that's just a testament of like someone who has a little bit of the background, like yourself. You have the understanding of what it takes to develop like young athletes and use tech doing it, but you also have the pitchability and compete component. And that is like, that's the total package. That's when you see a guy go from, amateur to pro status, is that right there. They have the entire component.
Yeah, I think the intangibles are so important there. And that was something that kind of developed. I struggled with that a lot, like early on in college. It was my sophomore year, especially. Sophomore year was really tough because that's when I felt like my knowledge of how to develop had improved a lot, but I hadn't learned yet how to separate myself as the competitor and then, working off of the mound. And so I had a really tough year because like a lot of my, like, I guess metrics were improving. I mean, I was starting to throw a little bit harder. I felt a little bit better. I was moving better. I was getting into all the training and stuff, but I struggled because I didn't know how to separate it. And then I was thinking on the mound about like, okay, why am I not getting outs? And then like, okay, trying to, work on this, change this, whatever, instead of just going out there and just letting it roll and compete. And those intangibles are so important. And it wasn't until I figured out, and I talked to a lot of my athletes about this, is like, you got to learn if you're going to be like really the cerebral thinker, like really getting into your development and taking ownership of it and trying to learn as much as possible and kind of be in the brain, you have to learn how to separate yourself almost into like two different people and be able to put that off to the side when it's time to put it off to the side and then use it when it's valuable.
Yeah.
Because it's if you take that onto the mound with you, you can't, it's so much harder to focus on the task at hand. And I think that's the biggest part is like, okay, what is the task at hand? Is it that I'm working on, this specific piece of my development, or is it that I'm just competing? And even in practice too, like in scrimmages, there's going to be times that you're working on something. If you're in live ABs, a bullpen, whatever, maybe you're working on a pitch, you're working on trying to get this, that, whatever. Or, it could be, all right, I'm just going to go out there and compete because I got to focus on learning how to compete better, or focusing better, whatever the case may be. And so I feel like that understanding the context as a player of like, okay, what is the task at hand, and being able to fully immerse yourself in it and not get lost in that. I think it's so important to be able to really reach the max potential of what you can do on a baseball field.
Yeah, that's why like relying on the routine is so important, because when you have a good routine that you rely on and that gives you confidence, you have a free mind. Like you prepare, you're done preparing, now you can go compete, and now you have a free mind and you're unconsciously competing. And that's really what I want. I want you just to be out there unconsciously just competing. And it doesn't matter what situation I put you in, especially in the fall. Like we'll compete, we'll have scripted scrimmages where you'll have nobody on base, and then we'll throw someone at second after an at bat. You might get the guy out, but you're going to get a runner at second. It's not like what's going on here? It just doesn't matter. There's a runner at second, go compete. You know what I mean? So we'll pitch like in the fall, this fall, we'll pitch a lot with runners on base, and there's a reason behind that, and it's because I need to identify and develop the guys to pitch their best when there's runners on base. Guys that are the best when they're down and they don't have their stuff. Those are the guys I'm going to. Like those are the guys that I need to rely on, and we need to identify who those are right off from the rip and who needs more work of it. Just because you struggle a couple times doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means we need to give you more opportunities to keep doing it, right? And develop more something else to get them out, or whatever it may be. We can go back to the lab, right, and then work on some stuff there, but then we go right back out to the field and say, all right, let's do it, let's put this into play. So that's a big part of our fall is competing. Like every time you step on the mound, you're competing. Like even our bullpens, we do our how we do our charted bullpens. We're competing. We have a running list on that. Same thing with the scrimmages, running list of like 4 components that we work on that I track no matter what. So the 4 most important stats that I have is first pitch strike percentage, fastball strike percentage, 1-1 count strike percentage, and then off speed and a deficit count strike percentage. So those are the 4 things. Like if you're at the top of the list in those 4 things, you're typically gonna eat a lot of innings. More than likely, right? I mean, some guys are different on one, but those 4 components are big.
Yeah. And I think that's a good way of assessing, where a pitcher is at and how they can compete using measurable data. Because I feel like that, all right, now you're looking at first pitch strikes, you're looking at like, okay, how am I attacking hitters and going right after them? 1-1 strikes. It's like, okay, that's an extremely important count. Like, where am I at? Where's my head at? So I feel like that's like, being able to find measurable ways to track that, competitive nature. And then obviously those are, that's going to be big on how you're going to succeed. So it's like, understanding more than just like, all right, what am I seeing in front of me? This guy has good stuff, but it's like, okay, how are they competing? And how are those going to translate to the game? But yeah, and I'm curious, like from a coaching mindset and the kind of team side of things, what's your mindset on like being able to develop that competitive nature and that focus and kind of those intangibles, especially when it's like that group environment? Sometimes you get guys that are the end of the spectrum where they have all the stuff, but they have no idea how to go out and compete, or even the flip side of that, that they know how to compete, but they don't have any of the stuff. How do you go about developing that and finding that kind of middle ground so that they
Yeah.
have both?
That's a good question. So I think it starts with trust. That's number one. I can't just go, I have a routine that we put in place for these guys. We have their whole fall scripted from like day one to when we play our first game, right? So August 19th, we're on the field. They're gonna have their schedule from August 19th to January 20 something, whenever we play. I don't even have the schedule. I haven't even gotten that far yet, but I have everything up to January, like the beginning of January for them. So they have their entire schedule. I can't really do anything with a guy. Like I give him a schedule. I can't be like, hey, you have to do this 24/7 and let me change this. Let me do that. I have to learn who they are, how they operate, and I need them to be able to trust me and earn their respect, earn their trust, and then we can start having conversations. So I think that takes time, and that's why we have the fall. That's the whole fall. If it takes the whole fall, it takes the whole fall of getting a guy to understand, who he is, identify who he is as a person, what are his weaknesses. Maybe it is mentally, maybe it's physically. Me, I understand that, right away. So it takes me quite a bit of time to figure that out. And sometimes it's quick, sometimes it's not. But then once we figure that out, we have a lot of one-on-ones. And I think a lot of it's just open dialogue and open communication. So developing the competitive side. And then I think there's not really like routine drills to sit there and be like, hey, this is going to help you compete, right? I think just being in the nature of the culture of competing every day, whether it's bullpens, it's conditioning, whatever it may be, it's going to constantly turn them. And if a guy can't really turn that on in the fall, they're going to fall behind. And I honestly have not seen someone really do that. In our culture, that just doesn't, it's really hard for that to survive, is someone that just says, no, I don't want to compete. And that's that part of the recruiting process too. Like when we recruit, I'm really diving into the competitor and the kid, and I'm talking to his parents. I'm trying to understand who he is as a person. What does he like to do? Does he play other sports? If he plays other sports, is he really, really competitive in those sports? I'm gonna go watch him play football. If he plays football, I'm gonna go watch him play football. All right, I'm gonna go see how he plays. It's a big part of that, as well as like if he plays basketball. So it's really just identifying, right? Can you develop the competitor? Yeah, but you got to put them in a culture where they compete all the time. And that's the biggest component to that. But also it's my job to find the right ones to come in to our program that I know that will be good fits. And watching a guy play another sport, let's say he plays basketball, watching how he plays basketball and competes will tell me a lot about how he is a baseball guy. Like, yeah, he may compete great in the baseball field, but if he goes to basketball and he gives up on a lot of stuff and he's just like, nah, whatever, that means he gives up easily on a few things, right? There's a few things, it's not a big deal. Yeah, maybe he doesn't just like basketball, he just loves baseball. Well, I want a competitor, right? I want the whole thing. And so a true competitor would not ever take a break. They'd be like,
Yeah.
I don't care if it's ping pong, I don't care if it's basketball, I don't care. I want the whole thing. And those are the guys that, like we talked about getting the big leagues. Those are guys in the big leagues. Every single guy in the big leagues is a true competitor that does not want to lose. They can't, they just do not want that. And that's kind of how I am as well. Wasn't talented enough to get to the big leagues, but tell you what, I'm a competitor. Like I want to win. So I want guys in this program that want the same thing.
Yeah, totally. And I feel like that's something that, I mean, you can kind of create the environment to try to breed that, but some of that too, it just comes from the guy, right? Like it's because you're looking at it as like, all right, if it's just like, I'm competitive in baseball because I enjoy it, but then in other things that, they don't have that same fire, it's like, okay, is that a red flag on like, all right, when things kind of go poorly and things aren't going your way and you're kind of going through the shitstorm, so to speak, are you going to be able to show up the same way? Is it just that competitive dog in you that you're going to, get after it? Or is it something that it's like, okay, when things are going well, is that when I'm going to show up? And I think that's for young guys, that's that mindset shift that makes you great, is like understanding, all right, like whatever it is, like I'm going to win because I just love competing and getting after it. Whether it's freaking, yeah, like you said, ping pong, whatever it is, like, showing up and getting after it. I got to see that too. I spent the spring with the Guardians, and I got to see that with a lot of those guys. And it's really cool to see the fruits of it this season, and what they've been able to do as a team, because that culture that I got to see from day one. I mean, those guys, it was really cool to see. A lot of those guys were there from day one of the winter off-season program, the second week of January when I got there. And I was like, man, like it's, we're more than a month out from spring training, and these guys are getting after it. Like more than half the team is out here ready to rock. And so being able to see guys like that, guys like Josh Naylor that are just like psychopaths for competing, it's really cool to watch. And it doesn't matter what it was, if it was just BP or whatever, like those guys were locking in. And that's such a big component of it.
I think you can develop the resiliency part. That is definitely developed. And I think that's a part of maturity, right? And a young kid, I think even pro guys, it's the same thing. Well, like I said, but you're not going to go to the big leagues unless you can handle yourself, and be resilient and be able to stay calm. Obviously we see guys lose it, but it's different when you've been there for a while. But for the most part, developing resiliency takes time, and that takes a guy to be, a young pitcher, a young freshman, to feel comfortable where he's at, to trust his coaches, to trust his teammates, and be in a culture where he feels like he can really develop and feel comfortable where he's at. And, obviously I don't want him to be comfortable all the time. I want him to be comfortable to be uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But being, developing resiliency is definitely a big part of developing the whole pitcher, like 100%. And especially when it comes to the postseason, like knowing full well that you can show up. Some guys just have it. Like they just, that's just how they were raised. Nothing really gets to them. Champagne was like that quite a bit. He was one of those guys before outings, you could just see he was just ready to go. It didn't really matter what the situation was. We saw him deal with a bunch of stuff that was ridiculous, and he dealt with it like an absolute pro. That is so valuable. The resiliency part is so valuable. So like all the young guys, high school guys, like when I go to recruit, I'm looking for that. I want to see them fail so bad. If I go watch a kid and he just carves everyone up, I'm just like, man, I was like, I needed to see something, because now, I got to come back. I'm going to see him a few times, but I want to, if I can see him fail right away, that helps a ton for me. And then the more times I see him, that's why you see a lot of guys on their Twitter in the recruiting stage in today is crazy. They're posting videos and their swings and they're hitting bombs and stuff, but I can't recruit off that. I need to see a guy fail. I need to understand who you are as a person and if it's a good fit for you. Because when you have a culture like ours, it's important that we bring in guys that really, really fit in here, that want to win, that want to compete, that want to be a great teammate, and that want to develop resiliency, right? And even though you're not perfect at it, it's all right. We can work with that. It just doesn't have to be perfect. As long as you're a great teammate, it goes a long way. Being a good teammate, like, kind of solves all of your problems, right? Because you're just going to develop, you'll be fine. So people will take care of you.
Yeah. And I think that's something that we've taken with Fearless and done a lot with. Like we take a lot of pride in the culture that we've built and the guys we bring in. And so like, that's one of the things that we do is we'll kind of vet our guys before we kind of accept them into the program, because it is so important, not just for you as an individual, but all the guys around you. Is like the culture that you build. You don't want to be detracting from the other guys that you're training next to. If everybody's kind of pulling in the same direction and everybody has that competitive spirit, that competitive mindset, everybody can, and it doesn't have to be perfect, but everybody has that will to push through and develop those traits. It makes such a difference because, and we've seen it with some of our guys when they go through some tough, whether it be like, hey, I dealt with something similar and this is how I got through it and you're going to be good, or it be like, hey, like, what do you need? Like, how can I help you? Let's talk, whatever, and just have that presence of people around you. And having that culture at Loyola was huge, because I felt like it makes it so much easier, like you said, to just kind of like you fall back on that culture and that routine and the guys around you So when things go poorly, it's just like, all right, like, let's rock, my guys got my back. And then it's like, all right, moving forward to the next thing. I think that's one of the big things that you see with guys who are successful is when they do fail, it's like, all right, what did I learn from it? First of all, what can I take from that? What's the plan to move forward and get better? And then it's like, all right, like cut it off and let's rock and let's roll with it.
Yeah. I think it's my job to put that plan in place, right? So it's my job as a pitching coach and as a coach in general is to have a plan put in place. That's like Bill Belichick, man. Like when those guys would lose, there was a plan. Like they knew what they were going to do to fix the problem to go win again. And I think that's a big part of my plan in our program is we put that in place. So when we have failure, you show up right afterwards. We have our detox sessions. We go over that stuff. And there's a plan in place for you to counter and fix or improve. I hate the word fix. I can't believe I just said that, but I'm trying to get away from the word fix. I can't stand it. But improve, you know what I mean? Like improve on whatever we need to improve on. And there's a plan put in place. So you're constantly have a growth mindset. You're constantly coming back for more. And you just want to feed the beast, right? Like, so that's all I'm doing. I'm feeding any way I possibly can. And it kind of goes into a lot of other things. Like it bleeds into your life, right? Like if you're staying up, late, not sleeping, you're eating bad food, it kind of goes all into it. So if we talk about those things, right? That's the culture we have is we have open conversations about this stuff. And it's a lot of what we talk about in the pro ball. Like people wonder like, what's pro ball like? It's like, man, we sit there and talk about ways that we're getting better. That's a lot of our conversations. Like, hey, I've been eating this. Like this is what I do for this. What have you been doing? Okay, I've been doing this. You know what I mean? Like, do you like the Mark Pro? I love the Mark Pro. I don't like Normatex. They don't really do much for me. It's a lot of just, chatter about little things that we can do to help each other get better and just kind of collaborate that way. So that's the part of recruiting today that's so weird, is guys are they're kind of dead set. Like I got to go to the biggest school I possibly can with NIL money and whatnot. Little do they know that there's a good culture somewhere. They just don't know, they might be like overlooking it. And that's what I did as a young guy. And now I can only imagine how often it's happening nowadays, especially with the portal. But so it's something to think about. Like if you're a young kid, I would really dive into the coaching staff and who they are as people. Like all of our players, like they're going to know my wife, they're going to know my daughter, right? Like they're going to be there. They're going to see what kind of person I am. And same thing with Coach K, with Hanny, like our guys, you get to know them, right? So it should be like that everywhere you go. So if you're going to whatever school you're going on a visit, like get to know the coaches, get to know, you want to learn about the program, but get to know them as people, because that goes to show you how they treat individuals and how they develop in personal relationships, because that stuff lasts forever. With guys transferring around from one school to two schools, 3, 4, I've seen guys in the portal that have been to 4 different schools with a year of eligibility left, and I just feel horrible for them. And, I don't know what the reasons are they're transferring, but there's no like culture for them to look back on and no alumni to really feel connected to, because the relationships you built at Loyola, you'll have for the rest of your life. And our relationship we'll have for the rest of our lives will be connected. And that just it's so, priceless. It's so valuable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think too, like guys, they put those blinders on and they're like dead set on like, okay, this is the type of program I have to be at, and like this level of winning or this level of like, big name school. And they miss like, okay, what are my goals with my career, and then what's going to get me there? And they miss out on like those important things of like, okay, one, I want to be in a place where I'm happy, where I enjoy the people I'm around. That I can show up to the field every day and it's not a chore for me. I'm, with the people that I love most, obviously other than your family, but hopefully they're right there with you and they are a second family for you. Right. So that first and foremost, and then second of all, like, okay, is this a place where I'm going to develop? Is this place going to get me to the next level, or take my, my development and put that, first and foremost, to allow for, the team's success. Right. And so, especially in college, it's so easy because you're only there for 4 years. it's a little bit less, long-term sighted than, let's say pro ball and what you as an individual are going to have for yourself. So it's really easy for coaches to say, okay, like I'm just going to get the guys in here that are going to get me to win now and just throw them out there and let them, win. And so it's a little more rare where you find a program like Loyola that the coaches are going to be there and say, all right, like we're going to put your development first as an individual. We're going to maximize your potential here. And we're going to go out there and put that team out there. And I think that creates, not only is every guy getting better and everybody's kind of pulling the team upwards, but then because you've put that work in, you have even more ownership of the team. And when you win and when you're competing, it means so much more. And so that elevates your performance even higher. And I think a lot of guys miss that. They don't understand that because they're so locked in, especially with the media nowadays. It's like, all right, like I got to be here because it looks really cool that I'm here. As opposed to like, all right, like let me really prioritize myself and prioritize my development and the place that I'm going to be happiest at and the culture that I can contribute really well to, and that is going to give back to me and kind of take that and run with it. I think a lot of guys miss out on that. And you get a lot of guys that could be professional baseball players that go somewhere, get lost, they don't improve or they get worse. And then that's it, where they could go somewhere else that's going to be a lot more conducive to their performance, their development, and their career could get a lot better.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think, we kind of, we could have gone the transfer portal route and just went portal for every single guy and just do the best we can to get guys in here and just let them go play. It really does make my job. If I really wanted to do that, I could just go play. It's kind of a finished product. He's only got a year left. Maybe he's not going to go play pro ball. Like it's easy I could see a coach doing that. Like, I don't know any that do that. I don't. I mean, a lot of the coaches I know that around the country are great coaches, and there's a lot of good ones, man. We haven't done that because for me, and like for my selfish satisfaction, taking a young kid, a high school kid, and developing them, and even a transfer that is 2 years in, and he's got 2 more years. Like that's still the same process. Like that's mid development. I mean, you think about like when you go to pro ball, man. Like my velo didn't jump until my second year in pro ball. Like, oh, wow, some guys develop super late, so that's still in the meat of their process, as opposed to getting like a 1-year guy. Yeah, there's a fine every now and then, but taking those high school kids, man, developing them, seeing them graduate, it means so much to them, their family, and to myself selfishly. Like I love to see that. And you're along their entire career. I can only imagine what it's like to, take a young kid out of Dominican at 16 and watching them come all the way up through the minor leagues as a coach and being with them every step of the way. Like I think that would be amazing.
Yeah.
There's something like that. That's selfishly, selfish me wants to do that all the time. And that's why I lean so heavily on the development side. That's where I get my satisfaction. And I think it's something that I love to do. And as opposed to just like, putting a finished product out there and letting it rip, which a lot of teams kind of can do that because, they can. It's sometimes they have to. Maybe their scholarships work a certain way or whatever. I have no idea. There's certain elements to that I just don't understand. There's things I just don't know. But I know what we can do is like a perfect fit for what I'm good at and what I love doing. So it's good so far.
Yeah. And I feel like it's so much bigger than baseball too. Like it really, being able to take someone and grow them into a man, right? Like bringing someone from a boy to a man and putting them out in the world, whatever that may be, whether they go on to play professional baseball or don't, there's so many things that you learn from baseball and that you learn from having, being in a culture like that and having that family of brothers around you. It's, there's so many invaluable lessons there. And being able to take, a young kid, like you're saying, like those, Dominican kids that, are with the team from when they're young kids and then they come all the way up, and it's so rewarding because it's so much bigger than baseball, and it makes you a better baseball player to be a better person. But ultimately, like it's so important. Like it's just a beautiful part of life,
Yeah. And everything comes full circle in baseball too. So, and I do believe that like 100%, everything comes full circle. So you see a lot of the tech right now. You see a lot of the velo stuff. You see a lot of UCL pops. There's no healthy arm in the draft right now. There's no such thing as a healthy arm. This stuff does come full circle. Eventually, guys are going to have to go back to pitchability. You're going to see a lot different type of pitcher in 10, 15 years. And this is just a hunch. Like I said, I don't have all the answers, but I know baseball does. If you look at the history, it kind of goes in circles. But with technology, it's kind of thrown it off its loop a little bit. So I do think that kind of happens. And the same thing for recruiting and in the portal and college baseball, that kind of changes as well. It's going to come full circle. So and you're already seeing it now with max with the rosters. You're going to see max rosters and limited, right? So now these guys are going to be, high school kids are going to be more enticed to go to the school that they feel is the best fit, as opposed to just sitting there saying, well, I'm going to go, to this school no matter what, anyway, how or possible, even though they have no chance, right? And that's kind of how it used to be as well. They were like, man, I really want to go to this school. This is where I can fit in and be really good and develop. So that kind of comes full circle as well. So, and that's what's great about baseball, man. It just keeps on going, and you just stay along for the ride.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the cool things that I got to see with the guards is like being able to like talk to a lot of the guys and kind of see where they came from. I felt like the schools that they came from in college or high school or whatever did not have much of an indication on like what they were doing in pro ball. And I saw guys that were coming from smaller schools. Obviously, like you're going to have more talent at those bigger schools, but I saw guys that were coming from smaller schools that were not these, crazy winning programs that were doing unbelievably, they were unbelievably successful. And then I saw other guys that, were coming from places like Vandy or wherever else that have these, unbelievable track records of winning. And they, can't even get out of, low A or high A. So it's like, at the end of the day, right? Like you could be the most talented player in the world and go to, winning culture, winning program, that has this big name, but it's being successful at baseball in the pros is so much bigger than that. It's so much deeper than that. It's about that resilience and like, how do you handle it when you're in a place that, you're just kind of thrown into the fire and shit hits the fan. It's like, how do you bounce back?
So that's funny you say that. So my first year I signed with Texas was in 2016. I went to AZL for a little bit because NAIA season ends a little early and my velo dipped. I was like 87, 88. And then they sent me there for like 2 weeks. I threw 9 innings, didn't give up. I think I gave up like 1 hit, and my velo creeped back up to like 90, 91. And they were like, all right, you're going to go up to Spokane, which by far, by the way, is the best stadium I've ever played in my life. And the best people. Like that experience was incredible. But I got up there and I met all the guys that got signed, out of all, that went directly to Spokane, right? That were drafted because I was just a free agent. And this was back when I think we had 40 rounds. I played with 2 D3 guys. We had 4 NAIA. We had Kyle Cody from Kentucky. Trying to think, there was a couple of them. We had 2 Pittsburgh guys, Alex Kowalczyk, Charles LeBlanc. So we had a few D1s, but it was completely spread out. We had 2 or 3 junior college guys. It was not like this is all Division I. It was not even close. And I honestly did expect that. I expected like that, we had Tyler Ferguson, who's in the big leagues with the A's. He was with us. He was signed the year before, but he was a Vanderbilt guy. Unbelievable teammate. Like everyone there was unbelievable teammate. That's the part about Texas that was great, is they draft good guys. And that's what made the experience probably so great for me, is I was around good people all the time. But it was just across the board, a mix of all schools, D2, D3, NAIA, Division I, junior college. And it was pretty close to being split, each one. I obviously there's a few more junior colleges than you'd think, to be honest. There's a lot of junior colleges at the time, but that was a different age. 2016 is different than 2024. So, but that is true. Like that's the one thing that took me by surprise when I got up there was guys that I played with throwing 95, 96, because they
Yeah.
came in 92, 93, and 2 years later, we had a guy from Millersville. It's a D2 school, and I don't know if they're still D2. They might be D1 now, but they were D2, and his name's Reed Anderson, and he came in, 92, 93, and then a year later, or like later that summer, he was like 95, 96, and then the next year he was 99, right? So when he went to Millersville, he wasn't throwing that hard, but they saw
Yeah.
something he developed. He was at a program that really, really did a great job developing pitchers, and went and then got drafted, right? So it's about the program, it's about the person you play for, it's about the coaches, it's about the resources that the athletic department can give you, and the support you have, right, as a player behind you, and that's what matters most. And it's not all Division I is just going to get you drafted.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, a good example of that I just thought of is Mason Miller, right? Went to a small school. I think he was throwing like low 80s when he got to college. Now he's, throwing
Type 1
absolute
diabetic.
gas. Yeah. Oh, is he? That's crazy.
Yeah, he's type 1
Um,
diabetic. So that story is incredible. So he lost all that weight. Um, I can't remember, he was diagnosed, I guess, in college, but he lost like 50 pounds or whatever, and then got back in the weight room. And next thing you know, he started gaining strength, and then boom, he started popping. Right. So I was diagnosed when I was 10 with type 1 diabetes. So way different. I wish I was diagnosed at whenever he was, because maybe I'd be throwing 100 right now. But, yeah, you talk about just someone who went from like just life's turned over, right? Something like type 1 diabetes that is really hard on you turns out to be something that changes your entire life for the better, right? And that's what it's done for me.
blessing.
If it wasn't
Yeah.
for diabetes, I would not be the person I am today and have the discipline that I have today. And I think that's exactly what it did for him in the weight room. And you can listen to a story, you can read about a story. He basically speaks to that, about the routine, his focus to discipline, and everything that went into that. And that was a big part of his success, which is crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think like that's so cool to like know and to understand like the work that came through that. For young guys, like, yeah, discipline is such a big part of it. And that, and you can kind of talk about this, but like it forces you to build habits that are going to put your body in a good place to thrive. And that's so important for baseball players because, our bodies are, that's everything. Our body's not, locked in. Obviously you have your guys that are not like fully locked in and, what their body, is or looks like
They're
and
just
still able to
talented.
do well. But yeah, but still at the same time, like it's so important. I mean, a guy like me that's undersized and all that, like I had to be locked in. I had to be sleeping 10, 11 hours a night and like be primed every single day if I wanted to be successful.
Yep.
But yeah,
Yeah, that's it's funny when in pro ball you'll see so many different guys. Like Pedro Payano was a guy that I played with. Um, he body, not a great body, but the strongest rotator cuff I've ever seen in my life. When you put him on the table to do staves, and his arm doesn't move. It just stays right there. And they're staving him, right? He's doing his arm care, and it doesn't move. And he throw 95, 96. He'll throw 150 pitches if he has to. And that's the difference, right? That's where everyone's different. And for someone like me or someone else that has to like do every little thing right just to compete with that guy, I have to do every little thing I can to maximize, right? Everyone's just different, man. And that's what's beautiful about the game.
yeah, yeah, for sure. So a couple other things that you wanted to kind of hit on is you want to talk about like long toss and then more time off throwing or off the mound, and then like plow guys throwing plow balls off the mound almost every day. I'm curious on thoughts on injury risk and all that stuff. And I think that's a really good conversation to have because I think it's so context dependent of like this, well, not just the specific guy, but like how are you performing the tasks? And I want to kind of get your thoughts on what you're thinking on it too, but I'll kind of give you, I guess,
Yeah.
where I'm at with it is like I don't think that the mound is necessarily like equivalent to stress. It's all context dependent on how you're utilizing it, right? And or plyo balls or whatever, right? So like when people will equate plyo balls to like, okay, velo drills, or whatever. It's all about how you use the implement, right? And so I was someone that I liked to feel the slope. And so when I would throw, I would try to get off the mound, multiple times a week, but it was just like, most of the time, especially as a reliever, I was just like, all right, I'm just going to get a little shorty in, like nice and light, just to feel the slope, feel getting, down in the zone, feel the baseball coming out of my hand, have some feel of where my body is. So it all depends on the guy, right? Like if a guy wants to feel the slope every single day, by all means go ahead. But I think it's within the context of how are you using what you're using? Um, you know, how is your body responding to it? I think is the biggest part. And understanding, okay, like where are we at today? How do you feel? How have you recovered? If you're a guy that uses Whoop or Aura or whatever, like where are we at and what are your trends looking like? How are you sleeping? How are you eating? And then it's like, okay, once we use that implement, how are you recovering or how have you recovered in the past from using it that way? And then like kind of modulating the intensity or the volume that way. So I think that's kind of my thought on it is like, I don't want to say specifically like, okay, you shouldn't do this more
Yeah.
or less. I think it's more understanding the person, understanding the context, and then modulating the intensity and volume that way. If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's where I feel like the Whoop bands come into factor. Like if you can wear a Whoop band, something that gives you kind of direct feedback on your recovery that day, you can kind of go into I can do this today. I can touch the slope a little bit. That's a measurement. Any way you can find measurements of recovery, I'm all for it. Like the recovery is such a big part of our program, and that's where I want guys to touch the mound as much as possible. But it's different when you have a young kid coming from a 2A school that may not have his training age might be 0, right? Like he might not understand a lot. It might be a big water hose for him, drinking out of a water hose. So that's where you kind of ease him into that, and you don't necessarily have to do that every day, and you can put him on long toss, as opposed to like an older guy's training age of maybe 2 or 3, and he understands and he who he is as a person, how he develops, he's recovering fine, he puts good stuff in his body, he can touch the mound more, right? So if you're a young kid and you do those things, you're just giving me a reason to put you on the slope more, right? And it doesn't mean you have to throw. I mean, there's water bags. You can pull some water bags out. You can do towel drills. We're not big into towel drills just because of the weight difference. I don't really like that as much, but the weight's a big part of throwing. I feel like the weights have to be there, and the water bags really help with training decelerators, right? So especially on the mound, like dry work on the mound was always a big component of mine. In the middle of starts, I would touch the mound 3 times in between starts, and I'm starting every 5 days. So that's 1 day not on the mound, and that's 1 day full of recovery. That's typically the day after, and then the second day it's like maybe some dry work, a little bit of this, and then I get on the mound full 85%, and I hit that number over and over, right? So if I'm 93, if my average velo is 93.2, I'm trying to hit 87 every single time, and I'm trying to hit 86, 87 every single time, because now I'm just syncing my body up for the next start, right? I don't need to go pop a velo in a midweek. My midweek is to get my hips reloaded, reset, sync my body back up, and then go back out, right? And there's components of strength to that. There's arm care and whatnot. So I think getting on the mound as much as possible is great. But like you said, it's different for certain guys. And that's where long toss, I feel like, is great, because 120 to 150, you're kind of mimicking the mound throw, right? So, the way we built out our program is 0 to 75 is hand path. 90 to 150 is hinge phase. That's where you're really focusing on lower half. And that's a lot of what the mound is like. And then anything past 150 is your braking phase. That's where you're braking quite a bit. That's my 2-year-old in the background. That's where you're braking quite a bit. And now you can get those decelerators popping, and now you're driving the whole motor at that point. So if there's any way to drive the motor without exhausting the arm on the mound, I'm all for it. And I think that's where the water bags help a ton, and even med balls without throwing them, right? And just holding the decelerators. So that's why I was curious to see what you thought. And I'm glad I'm on the same page as you. to know that, we're kind of doing the right things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, with everything, it's understanding the context. And I think like that's something that a lot of guys can kind of get lost in is like, all right, there should be a purpose with what you're doing, right? And so like if a guy's just doing things to do things, or they just want to like they're throwing a bunch of volume on their training or throwing or whatever, it's like, all right, I feel like asking the question to those guys of like, all right, what are we accomplishing here? Like what is the point? What are we doing here? And that kind of helps to put things in context of like, okay, is this necessary? What are we doing? Is there a purpose? Or are we just like throwing volume to throw volume on because you don't feel right and you want to feel better or whatever it is, right? It's like if you can hone in on like, all right, here's my purpose, this is what I'm trying to accomplish. And then let's try to do that with, obviously you want to get a certain amount of volume on you and intensity on you so that you can kind of build yourself up for competition. And it's like, all right, if we can do that in the least amount of time and effort and all that stuff, like, and get the most result for what we're doing, like that's the goal, right? It's not to just like throw stuff on a wall and see what sticks. It's like, all right, obviously there's a time and place for that when you're really, lost and you don't know where we're going. But it's like, okay, asking that context question. Okay, where are we? What are we doing? What's the purpose of this? And then like, working back from there. So that we're not just like overloading guys. And with those young guys that kind of have that training age of 0, those freshmen coming in that have no idea what they're doing, don't know how to train. It's, a lot of that is like, okay, let's add one thing at a time. You don't want to overwhelm them. Like you said, you don't want to drink out of a fire hose. It's like, all right, let's add one part to your routine. Let's see how you feel with that. Does that work for you? Great. If it does, we'll take it. If it doesn't, we'll move on to the next thing. We'll learn another thing, add another thing to your routine and just stack that way. And then just be monitoring as you go. Like, all right, how are we recovering? How are you feeling? Are you overly sore? How does your shoulder feel? How does your arm feel? Whatever. Where are we at? And not just understanding of like, okay, did we push too hard? But it's also like, all right, are we pushing too little right now? Like, do you feel perfect every day and you're not, getting a stimulus on your body? It's like, all right, there should be that happy medium of like, all right, I feel like I did good work, but I'm not feeling so, run down that I have pain or like this unbelievable soreness that doesn't allow me, work the next day.
I think like writing it down, like having a guy look at the program, maybe look at a dynamic movement that we're doing for the day and saying, what do you think of it? What are your thoughts on this? Why are you doing it? And getting them to write it down before maybe even they do it, kind of gives you an understanding of where their head's at. And that way, where their head's at, because that's a part of coaching that's my job, is to understand where his development is at right now at this time, so I can continue to have him progress. And that's a big part of, writing down is for him, but it's also for me. And he can learn from that as well. And that's why journaling is such a big part of what we do. And I know Coach K does it with the hitters, and he's seen great results with it. We'll continue to do that with the pitchers as well. And that's where, like, one of the other things I wanted to talk about was like FMS is, putting those assessments in at the beginning and trying to simplify it. There's 7 different components to it, but how do you simplify, for pitchers? There's a few moves, maybe even not even for the weight room, but more so just for the pitching side. Not, whether it's how can we better identify a pitcher who's a linear movement, who's a linear mover or a rotational mover from the get-go, right? Just by doing a quick assessment. That's something that I'm like very interested in and would love to have a better routine for myself to give to the guys. And that way we have an understanding of where to start with some guys, right? Like we have we kind of figure that out, but maybe having a little assessment might even be better.
Yeah. I'm glad you bring that up, because that's something that I feel like, I'm excited to kind of talk about it. Is like, I feel like I've kind of not changed, but like evolved the way that I think about assessment, over the last few years. And a lot of it, I think I guess the more simple you can make it and still get the same or more information out of it, I think is really valuable. I think right now, or at least in the last, 15 years, as pitching development has blown up, assessments have become like very long and drawn out and like, okay, let's check every single box. But I feel like, and obviously it takes a certain level of skill to, and like deep knowledge of, anatomy and movement and all that stuff. But I feel like a lot of times, like a lot of that is kind of wasted time and unnecessary. I feel like we can cut a lot of that out if we can keep the context of the person in front of us first before we just like start checking a bunch of boxes. So like kind of the mindset that I've taken now is like, okay, the first thing I want to do is understand the context of like where you at, not just in like health, but also performance. Like, where are we as a pitcher, right? If a guy is competing his butt off, crushing it, throwing hard, no injuries, feels great, he's not overly sore, like I'm in most cases, like I'm not so concerned about what you look like. I'm just like, all right, like I'm pretty confident that what you're doing is pretty good. If you're a high level guy, especially if you're a pro, it's like I probably want to keep my hands off of you for the most part. And we're just doing little tweaks to improve you and get you better, where we can find those 1%. So I think that's the first thing. It's like identifying like, okay, where are we at? Because I think there's tiers, right? There's the guys that need an overhaul. And then there's the guys who need like a good bit of work, but not a ton. And then there's the guys who's like, all right, let's just hammer those little 1%. All right. So I think for me, that's the first thing is identifying like, okay, how much work are we going to do here? Are we going to need to do? Then from there, it's like, okay, now I want to see how are you moving? How are you responding to the training that you're doing? Where are you feeling it? Right. So like where someone's sore or where someone's feeling pain, I feel like that's something that for me can tell me a lot about like what's going on here, where the stress is leaking towards. So that's the first thing, right? Or if a guy is like not getting sore, then it's like, okay, maybe you move pretty well and you're pretty efficient, or maybe we're not getting as much out of your body as we probably could, and you're not using all of your power and stressing all your tissues. And then it's like, okay, now we got to rev the engine a little bit, right? Like that stuff can kind of tell you a little bit, which I know I'm kind of like rambling off a little bit, but I'm just trying to like get all my thoughts together.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
It's
but
a,
then
it's a
so then I think,
complex it's a complex thing that it really depends on the player,
yeah,
right?
it's so
Like
context dependent
yeah,
for sure, for sure. And
that's
then I
the
think, yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
well, it's like I, you know, having an assessment for the weight room is one thing, right? Whether you're doing a Dow squat or, um, you're measuring internal, external rotation with the hips. Like there's certain things that could help quite a bit. And I'm trying to understand how to find just a few pieces that we can do with someone with a university that doesn't have the resources
Yeah,
like you and Texas and stuff like that, where we can implement a few of those things that might help us on the front end a little bit better, that speed up
mhm,
and I can program a little bit better specifically for someone right out of the gate, right? Because I
yeah,
said it takes time to get to know somebody and it takes time to earn their trust, but having those things, right off the rip to really understand who they are is a ton. And we've talked about that with Oshner, like we've talked about maybe doing assessments and whatnot that can help us. And if it's something that you think is definitely worth doing on the front end, then that's something that I would like to consider right away.
yeah. I think like a standard assessment would never hurt. I think the bigger thing is like understanding the context of the assessment, right? And so like for me, like now I was actually just having this conversation today. Today's Monday, so it must have been yesterday. I was having this conversation with one of my fellow sports residents here at USC, and so we're talking about how um, a lot of times you'll see a guy. I mean, we'll use the example of like hip rotation, right? Range of motion. Sometimes you'll see guys that are so basically they have what's called like pelvic, it's their like hip anteversion or retroversion. So it's basically like the bony morphology of your pelvis and your hip socket. And so it's like that'll affect whether you have like more or less internal rotation. Same thing with pitchers, you see it with the humerus, with the external internal rotation. See the throwing arm has a ton of ER, not as good IR. And so that's because the bone is actually twisted to allow for more external rotation. From throwing from a young age, your body adapts. And so I think everybody moves differently. So that's like, for me, one of the first things I want to look at is how do you move? And what kind of mover are you? So I'm gonna, take video of you and I'm gonna see, all right, what do your throwing mechanics look like? And then it's understanding and having like the eye to know, okay, first of all, I mean, to, throw this before looking at anything else is like understanding there's no one perfect way to throw. And for me, kind of the way that my thought process has evolved is like, all right, really the only thing or the biggest thing that I'm looking at is how you're transferring energy up the chain and are you leaking it?
Yeah.
So that's the first thing is like, are you smoothly transferring the energy from the ground into the baseball all the way up the chain without leaking energy at one of the segments, right? And so from there, it's understanding, okay, your deviation from what we classify as like efficient, like the, good mechanics, is that essentially like a superpower for you? Is that something that you're doing differently that allows you to, to like create more power and transfer energy better? Or is it something that's leaking energy? So it's really, for me, it's like, I'm looking at how are you transferring energy and is this thing contributing to it or not? And then from there, I'm able to like look at the numbers of what I'm assessing, of like your, whether it's range of motion, strength, or whatever. And then how does that relate to the rest of your body? It's like some guys you'll see that have super tight hips, but then they have a ton of like thoracic rotation that makes up for it, or they're just super stiff, right? So like that's a whole other conversation we can talk about where like I feel like in the past, there's been all the craze of like hip to shoulder separation and like getting into these deep ranges of motion. But then like you start to realize like, okay, is it really the range of motion that helps guys throw hard? Or is it just that like taking up the slack of your tissue and being able to create tension as you're rotating so that you can like keep the energy going, moving through the whip essentially. And so it's like that context of understanding like, okay, maybe you're super tight, but maybe you don't need that range of motion because you're still able to keep that tension and not, like, for example, Bruce Gratterall doesn't get into very deep ranges of motion, but he keeps tension and he rotates fast as hell and he throws gas, right? Whereas like Jacob deGrom, very lanky guy, has a lot more of that range of motion, gets into these deep positions. And it's like understanding, okay, he gets into those deep positions to create that tension. Essentially, him and Gratterall are doing the same thing. They just have different lengths to play with. The rubber band is longer on Jacob deGrom. It's shorter on Gratterall, right? And so that's my thought process. And that's just like, it's very context dependent and it's not like clear cut, unfortunately, but it's like understanding, okay, where is the athlete? How do they move? And then taking the numbers from, I think a general assessment is valuable. Whether you take like just like the general FMS or whatever, and then from there understand the context of how they move and then how those numbers fit into that. And then from there, going a step further and saying, okay, are there things that we need to look even further into? Or do we need to work on the way you move because it doesn't match up with your range of motion? Or do we need to work on your range of motion or strength because it doesn't match up with the way you move? Or are you trying to change your mechanics one way, but the other way that you're trying to move away from is actually something that's good for you, even though it's different from the rest of the pack, if that makes sense.
No, it does. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's
Which
like, I think you make a good point of like, if a lot of guys, they get into the same move, you see guys online, like they all get into like a power position, hand up. But there is a principle there, like keeping tension. That is a principle. I think every guy does it a little different. I'm definitely someone who's tight, right? I've always been tight and I don't have great. It's almost like if my hips were too loose, or I felt too loose, I was not going to feel good that day. So I needed to tighten back up. So, and there's little ways to do that, especially in minor league ball, man. Like you're like, man, I'm way too loose today. I'm going to rip a couple of push-ups. Like I'm going to do something to tighten things up, get a little bit more tension.
activation. Yeah.
Activation, right? And then you start mixing that in the routine, and you only do it a few times when you feel a certain way, little go-to things that you have. And that's where like an assessment is good, but it doesn't mean the player needs to sit there and look at an assessment. It's more so for us to sit there and look at it and be like, okay, when he starts to feel a certain way, now we can kind of go back to it and be like, okay, now this makes sense.
Yeah. 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 And I guess the like the example that we were talking about yesterday, me and one of my buddies. So he was a kicker in college. He kicked for San Diego State. So he has super, super tight hip flexors and adductors, right? And so we were talking about that, and we're like, man, yeah, like you can't move, like I can't get anything out of you. And we were like talking with another one of the residents, and we were like, yeah, but like, you know, if you see like a football player that has this, let's say, kicker that has this, it's like, but is this something that we want to address, or is this something that we're like, no, like good, like this is what he needs. This is what allows him to kick so hard. It's like, same thing. It applies all the way around. It's like, yeah, maybe it's a deficit, for your average population or for someone who moves differently or whatever. But it's like, okay, but let's look at the context of how this person moves and like, how does that fit into what they're doing? And is that something that's actually helping them? It's like, you don't want to get lost in that, right? Like the assessment, it can be a great tool, but it can also kind of like throw you off if you don't understand the context of the guy in front of you.
Yeah, it's the same thing as tech. Like you take bits and pieces.
100%.
You don't want to just devour that stuff every single day. It's like you eat the same meal every single day, all day long. Like you're gonna get a little lost, right? Like you kind of have
Yeah.
you need a variety. You need to be able to pop in and pop out, pop in and pop out.
Yeah.
Use things as a resource and not like that's your entire identity is
Yeah.
TrackMan. Your entire identity is TrackMan. Your entire identity is some sort of assessment that you're living off of, and that's the reason why your entire thing is based around. And so I completely understand that, and that's
Yeah.
a big part of what we do is like just take bits and pieces, not drink from the water hose, and let's find what works for you. And let's throw things, the stuff that we throw them out. Don't worry about it. Focus on the stuff that feels good. Like 100%. If it feels good, it's probably all right. And someone else might be doing it, that something that you threw out, but it feels good for them, right? And then that's a big part is just trying to develop that routine. And that's like our number one thing. We had a kid on campus today, and that's why I told him, like, I'm here to help you develop your routine as a young kid, help you develop your routine and give you confidence as you go through it and keep you on track and keep you moving forward. Like that's my job is to keep doing that. I will track it. We have measurements to track it, but that's ultimately our goal. And that it never ends. It just never ends. Regardless of whether you play for 15 years, 5 years, it doesn't matter. You just keep on. It's just over and over and over. You know what I mean? So try to maximize that as quickly as possible, obviously in college, because it is a short window, but
yeah. And it's easy to get lost in it when you like, get too focused on one thing or another thing. And if you keep that mindset and like that perspective of like, all right, these are the things that work for me. Let me cut the fat, focus on this stuff. It allows you to thrive so much more, and you're not just spinning your wheels, wasting time, wasting energy. You're able to just kind of move forward and let things ride. And that was something that I felt like my last year helped me a lot, is like my warm up got so much shorter that last season because a lot of it was just hitting fungo. Like I felt like that primed me to rotate so much better. And I'm someone that's tight too, and I don't, I don't get into those deep ranges of motion. And so I felt like, and now thinking back on it, I felt like I was trying to get into so much thoracic rotation and extension to like create this range of motion to create velo, and that might have been hurting me. And now, I look back and I started just hitting fungo and I shortened my warm up totally and allowed like the fungo to be the majority of my warm up just because it felt good. And now I look back and I'm like, okay, now I understand why, right? Like I was allowing everything to just get primed. I was getting, my blood flowing. I was maximizing like that tension and my rotation. So it's like things like that, right? Like that young guys, if they can keep that context of like, all right, like what works, what doesn't, who am I as a mover? Who am I as a player? Who am I as a thrower? And then what can I take, not just in, your routine for development, but like in every part of it, the competitive side, off of the field with, just life. Like, okay, what works for me? What doesn't work for me? And how do I cut the fat and get rid of all those, distractions and just like, make everything as efficient as possible.
And we're trying to do that every day. Even in my normal life, I'm trying to do that every single day. Just a little bit.
And it never ends, man. It never ends.
But that's good.
Yeah, man, it's been a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah.
I think we've talked about some really good stuff, and hopefully, our, everybody listening can take a lot from this. I definitely can. So it's been a pleasure, man. Anything else you want to say?
No, man, thanks for having me. Let's do it again soon. I think there's a lot more to talk about just in general with like motor preferences and the way we move and whatnot, and just, the game inside the game, pitching, pitch calling, stuff like that, there's little things like reading hitters and stuff that I think would be good to talk about, something that I thought, you're really, really good at, and something that I leaned on as a strength of mine. And I think there's a lot to be said there as well. So if you're down to do it again, you let me know when, man. I'm always available.
Definitely, man. We'll do it. We'll do it on and off the podcast, man, for sure.
Absolutely.
But yeah. So for everybody listening, hope you get a lot out of this and stay fearless.